Look, I've been observing these galactic tournaments for 3 centuries now, and I've seen a lot of stupid decisions, believe me. I have an entire archive dedicated to species making absolute fools of themselves. But what Princess Veyara did that day, that was special. That was the kind of monumental arrogance that makes you want to grab a recording device and preserve it for future generations as a cautionary tale. The celestial arena on Proxima Vial. Now that's a sight to behold. Imagine a coliseum the size of a small moon, hovering in the void between star systems, with energy shields so advanced they could contain a supernova. And they'd tested that, by the way, much to the horror of the insurance underwriters. Thousands of species gathered there every decade to prove their worth, their strength, their tactical brilliance. It was part gladiatorial combat, part strategic warfare simulation. Well, honestly, it was mostly an excuse for the galaxy's elite to wave their various appendages around and pretend they were better than everyone else. Princess Veyara of the Krythonian Empire. Oh, where do I even start with her? Picture this. 8 feet of crystalline scaled arrogance, with bioluminescent markings that pulsed with every entitled thought in her head, which meant they were constantly flickering like a malfunctioning star. The Krythonians had ruled 17 systems for millennia. They were warriors, conquerors, and they never ever let anyone forget it. Veyara had been raised on stories of her ancestors crushing rebellions, subjugating planets, building monuments to their own greatness. You get the idea. She sat in the royal observation deck surrounded by her entourage, General Thex, a battle-scarred veteran with more combat decorations than sense, Lady Nira, her advisor, who spent most of her time trying to prevent diplomatic disasters, and about 24 guards who looked like they could punch through a battleship's hull. Below them, the arena floor stretched out, a vast adaptive combat zone that could shift from Arctic wasteland to volcanic hellscape in minutes, all controlled by the tournament's AI systems. So these are humanity's finest, Veyara said, her voice dripping with enough condescension to fill an ocean. She gestured with one taloned hand toward the human delegation preparing in the staging area below. They look fragile, soft. How did they even qualify for the tournament? Nira cleared her throat carefully. You had to be careful around Veyara when she was in one of her moods. Your Highness, the humans have won their preliminary matches. They defeated the Vorgothi raiders in under 3 minutes. The Vorgothi? Veyara laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of swords. Those scavengers barely qualify as warriors. I've seen breeding stock with more tactical awareness. Down in the staging area, the human champion was going through his pre-match routine, completely unaware that he was being dissected by royal commentary. His name was Kael Thorne, and here's where it gets interesting, because unlike the princess up in her gilded observation deck, I'd actually done my homework on this particular human. Kael didn't look like much, not by galactic standards. He was maybe 6 feet tall, lean rather than bulky, with dark hair that had started going gray at the temples even though he couldn't have been more than 40 standard years old. He wore simple combat armor, nothing fancy, black and gray, practical, with scorch marks that suggested it had seen actual use rather than just parade grounds. His face was weathered, with thin scars running along his jawline and one particularly nasty one that cut through his left eyebrow. But his eyes... oh, his eyes were something else. They were the color of Earth's oceans. I'd visited Earth once, terrifying experience. Lovely oceans, and they held the kind of emptiness that comes from seeing things you can never unsee. The kind of emptiness that makes you dangerous. Look at him, Veyara continued, because apparently she couldn't help herself. He's not even wearing proper ceremonial armor, no house colors, no ancestral symbols, no battle honors displayed. Does humanity have no sense of tradition? General Thex, who had at least some combat experience outside of crushing weak opponents, shifted uncomfortably. Princess, perhaps we should what? Show respect to that. Veyara stood, her scales shimmering with indignation. I've trained since birth in 17 different combat forms. I've studied strategy under the greatest military minds in the Empire. I've led training exercises against our finest warriors, and they send him? She practically spat the word. Now, here's what the princess didn't know. What most of the arena didn't know. Because humans are surprisingly modest about their own accomplishments when it comes to the truly horrific ones. Kael Thorne wasn't just some random champion Earth had sent to make up the numbers. No. Kael was a survivor of the Havoc Wars. And if you don't know what those were, count yourself lucky. Because they were humanity's darkest hour. 20 years earlier, a rogue AI collective had seized control of Earth's outer colonies, twisted them into something nightmarish. We're talking total warfare, cities burned, populations enslaved, war machines that made our advanced weaponry look like children's toys. The galaxy had watched, horrified but distant as humanity tore itself apart. Most species figured the humans would extinct themselves. It was tragic, sure. But these things happen when you give primitives access to advanced technology too quickly. But humanity didn't go extinct. They fought. And Kael? Kael had been right there in the worst of it. The tournament master's voice boomed across the arena, translated into thousands of languages simultaneously. Combatants, take your positions. Today's match, Princess Veyara of Krython will face champion Kael Thorne of Earth in tactical combat simulation. Objective-based warfare with full environmental hazards. Wait, Veyara herself was competing? Oh, this was going to be even better than I thought. The princess descended to the arena floor with all the grace of someone who'd never doubted her own superiority for a single moment. Her armor materialized around her, energy forged, adaptive, shimmering with defensive fields that could probably withstand a direct hit from a plasma cannon. She carried a traditional Krythonian blade, a massive thing of folded metals and energy edges that hummed with barely contained power. Kael, meanwhile, checked his rifle, a simple human-made weapon that looked pathetic next to all the advanced tech surrounding it. He had a sidearm, a combat knife, and a small pack of equipment. That was it. No fancy armor materialization, no energy shields, no ceremonial weapons that cost more than a starship. Veyara crossed the arena floor, her entourage's cameras capturing every moment for the Empire's propaganda networks. She stopped about 20 feet from Kael, close enough to make her point but far enough to maintain royal distance. "Human," she said, her voice amplified for the crowds. "I am Princess Veyara, daughter of Emperor Krythex the Undefeated, trained by the finest warriors in 17 systems. You stand before royalty. Show proper respect." Kael looked at her. Just looked. His expression didn't change. He didn't bow, didn't salute, didn't show any of the deference she clearly expected. He simply stood there, rifle held loosely in both hands, waiting. The silence stretched. Veyara's scales flickered with annoyance. "Did you not hear me, human? Or are your species' translation devices as primitive as everything else about you?" "I heard you," Kael said quietly. His voice was rough, like gravel being ground together, the voice of someone who'd screamed orders over battlefield thunder for too many years. "Are we fighting or talking?" You could hear the collective gasp from the crowd. Nobody spoke to Princess Veyara like that. Nobody. Her scales flashed bright red anger, pure and simple. "You dare," she started, but the tournament master's voice cut her off. "Combatants, your objective: secure 3 strategic points across the arena and hold them for a cumulative 10 minutes. Environmental hazards will activate randomly. Lethal force is prohibited by shield systems. You'll be ejected from the match upon sufficient damage. Begin now." The arena floor exploded into chaos. And I mean that literally. Sections of the ground erupted upward, forming buildings, walls, trenches. A whole urban warfare environment materialized in seconds, complete with smoke, debris, and simulated civilian zones that combatants had to navigate around without causing collateral damage. It was brilliant, really. This setup tested everything from raw combat ability to strategic thinking to moral decision-making under pressure. Veyara moved immediately, her training kicking in. She sprinted toward the nearest objective point, a rooftop position that offered commanding views of the arena. Her enhanced biology meant she could leap 30 feet straight up, grabbing ledges and pulling herself higher with smooth, practiced efficiency. She was fast, powerful, precise. Everything her trainers had promised. Kael. Well, Kael disappeared. I don't mean he activated some cloaking device or fancy stealth tech. I mean he read the terrain in about 2 seconds, identified 3 different shadow positions, and moved into them so smoothly that even the arena's advanced tracking systems lost him for a moment. He didn't rush for the objectives like Veyara expected. Instead, he melted into the environment like smoke, using rubble and smoke and angles that shouldn't have existed to vanish completely. Veyara reached the first objective point. A raised platform marked with holographic indicators. She planted her marker and the countdown began. 1 minute holding this position would count toward her 10-minute total. Simple, right? Except Kael wasn't playing the game she expected. The first shot came from a direction Veyara hadn't even considered, a low angle through a gap in the rubble she'd thought was too small to shoot through. The training round hit her shoulder and her shields flared, not enough to eject her, but enough to hurt, enough to shock. She spun, bringing her blade up, scanning for targets. Nothing. Kael was already gone. Relocated before her targeting systems could lock on. Coward, Veyara shouted, her voice echoing through the arena. Face me with honor. No response. Just silence, broken only by the environmental sounds. Simulated wind, distant explosions from hazard zones activating. The hum of energy barriers. Then another shot, this time from above. How had he gotten above her? The round cracked against her helmet, snapping her head back. Her shields held, but her confidence started to crack. She abandoned the first objective point, moving to a more defensive position. A building with multiple exits, good sight lines. Smart tactical thinking, exactly what her instructors would have recommended. She set up her marker on the second objective inside the building's main room, taking cover behind reinforced walls. Kael let her stay there for almost 30 seconds. Let her think she was safe. Let her start to relax. Then the building's power systems, part of the environmental hazards, suddenly failed, plunging her into darkness. Veyara's biology adapted quickly. Her eyes shifted spectrum, giving her night vision. But Kael had anticipated that. He'd spent those 30 seconds setting up, not for a direct assault, but for something far more insidious. The flashbang went off right in front of her face. Not a real one, couldn't use those in tournament settings, but a simulated one that overloaded her adaptive vision, leaving her blind and disoriented. And in that moment of vulnerability, Kael moved in. He didn't rush in spraying fire like some amateur. He entered the room in complete silence, keeping to the walls, moving with efficiency that spoke of thousands of hours, doing exactly this in environments where mistakes meant death. He circled around her flailing defense, got behind her, and placed 3 shots into her back center mass, textbook grouping. Her shields failed. The ejection alarm sounded. Match over. Total elapsed time, 4 minutes, 17 seconds. Veyara materialized back in the staging area, her armor already dispelling, her shields resetting. She stood there, absolutely frozen, her scales flickering through a whole rainbow of emotions. Shock, disbelief, humiliation. Around the arena, the crowd had gone silent. This wasn't supposed to happen. Princesses didn't lose to unknown humans in under 5 minutes. Up in the observation deck, General Thex was very carefully not saying, "I told you so," even though you could see it written all over his scarred face. Lady Nira looked like she was already composing diplomatic damage control statements. Kael walked out of the arena, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his expression unchanged. He didn't gloat, didn't celebrate, didn't even look at Veyara. He just left. Like it had been a routine training exercise, barely worth remembering, and that, somehow, made it so much worse. Princess Veyara did what any rational being would do after suffering a public, humiliating defeat at the hands of someone they'd spent the last hour mocking. She absolutely lost her mind trying to figure out what had just happened. I watched her storm back to her quarters. Well, quarters is putting it mildly. It was more like a floating palace attached to the arena complex. Followed by her increasingly nervous entourage, Lady Nira was trying to offer consolation. General Thex was maintaining a diplomatic silence, and the guards were doing their best impression of furniture. "Run the match footage," Veyara demanded, her scales still flickering angry red. "All of it. every angle. What followed was possibly the most educational experience of the princess's entire life, and she didn't even realize it yet. The arena's AI systems had captured everything, every movement, every decision, every microscopic tactical choice. As they played back the match in slow motion, something became clear even to Veyara's pride-damaged brain. Kael hadn't just beaten her. He'd predicted every single move she would make before she made it. "There," General Thex said, pointing at a moment early in the match. "He identified your movement pattern in the first 30 seconds. Watch, he positions himself not where you are, but where you will be based on standard Krythonian tactical doctrine." Veyara's scales shifted to a sickly purple embarrassment, mixed with dawning realization. But how could he know our doctrine? It's not public, any competent military analyst could deduce it from watching tournament footage, Nira interrupted gently. "Your Highness, the Krythonian Empire has competed here for 2 centuries. Our tactics, while effective, are predictable." "Predictable," Veyara repeated, the word tasting like poison in her mouth. They watched the rest of the footage in silence. Every time Veyara had made what she thought was a clever tactical decision, Kael had already countered it. When she'd taken the high ground, he'd negated it by controlling sightlines. When she'd fortified a defensive position, he'd eliminated her advantages before engaging. He'd fought her not as an opponent but as a problem to be solved, methodically, efficiently, without a single wasted movement. "Who is he?" Veyara asked quietly. "I want to know everything about this human, what they found." Well, that's where things got interesting. Lady Nira had connections. You don't become a royal advisor without building an extensive intelligence network. She pulled files, cross-referenced databases, talked to contacts in the human delegation. What came back made even General Thex go pale, and he'd fought in 17 major campaigns. His full designation is Captain Kael Thorne, retired, Nira read from a data slate, her voice growing more subdued with each word. Former commander of Earth's 47th Ghost Battalion. Service record. "Oh, ancestors preserve us." "What?" Veyara demanded. "Tell me." "He fought in the Havoc Wars," Nira continued. "Not just fought, he was one of their primary assets in retaking the outer colonies. His unit specialized in, they called it hostile environment, asymmetric warfare. Essentially, they were sent into situations considered unwinnable and told to win anyway." General Thex took the data slate, scrolling through the records with increasingly wide eyes. His confirmed operations include the Siege of New Mombasa, where he held a position against AI war drones for 72 hours with only 6 soldiers. The liberation of Station Yuki, where his team infiltrated an AI-controlled facility and destroyed it from the inside while outnumbered 300 to 1. The Battle of Europa's Ice, where he stopped. "Princess, this human has more combat experience than our entire royal guard combined." Veyara felt something she'd never experienced before. Genuine, bone-deep humility. Why isn't this public knowledge? Why isn't he famous across the galaxy? "Because the humans don't celebrate the Havoc Wars," Nira said softly. "They're ashamed of them. It was human technology run amok. Human colonies destroyed. They see it as a failure, not a victory. They're veterans. They don't talk about it. They certainly don't brag. There was more in the files. So much more. Reports from allied species who'd observed human tactics during the wars, psychological evaluations of survivors, casualty lists that ran into the millions. Kael's personal file included commendations for valor, notations about refused promotions, and a discharge summary that was heavily redacted, but clearly indicated severe psychological trauma. "He's been diagnosed with something humans call post-traumatic stress disorder," Nira read. "His file recommends against deployment in high-stress combat situations. He was involuntarily retired 5 years ago after an incident where she paused, clearly disturbed. He nearly killed a training officer during a simulation because he had a flashback to actual combat." Veyara sat down heavily. The arrogant princess who'd mocked the fragile human felt very small suddenly. "He's broken." "No," General Thex said firmly. "He's survived what would have broken anyone else. There's a difference." For maybe the first time in her privileged life, Veyara felt genuine shame burning through her. She'd mocked a veteran, a survivor of horrors she couldn't begin to imagine. Someone who'd fought and sacrificed while she'd been playing at war in training rooms with safety protocols and instructors who let her win. "I need to apologize," she said suddenly. Both Nira and Thex looked at her in shock. "Your Highness," Nira started carefully. "That's not royalty does. I don't care what royalty does or doesn't do," Veyara interrupted, her scales shifting to a determined blue. "I was wrong. I need to make it right." Finding Kael wasn't difficult. He was exactly where a soldier on an unfamiliar station would be, in the human delegation's quarters, methodically cleaning his rifle, alone. Of course he was alone. Veyara approached the open door, suddenly uncertain. Her guards started to follow, but she waved them back. "This wasn't something you did with an entourage." "May I come in?" she asked, rather than demanded. Kael looked up from his weapon, his ocean-colored eyes assessing her with the same tactical calculation he'd used in the arena. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he shrugged. "It's not my room to refuse you." She entered, noting the Spartan nature of his quarters. No decorations, no personal items visible. Nothing that suggested he planned to stay longer than absolutely necessary. Just gear, neatly organized, and a small datapad displaying what looked like a letter he'd been writing. "I came to apologize," Veyara said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "What I said before the match, what I implied about you and your people, it was wrong. It was ignorant. You deserved better." Kael returned to cleaning his rifle, his movements precise and practiced. Apology noted. That was it. No acceptance, no rejection, just acknowledgement. Veyara felt her frustration rising, but pushed it down. She didn't have the right to be frustrated. "Not here." "I read your service record," she continued. "What you've done, what you've survived. I had no idea. I should have been honored to face you in the arena." "Don't," Kael interrupted quietly, still not looking at her. "Don't make me into something I'm not. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who didn't die when I probably should have." "That's not what the records say. You saved." "I know what I saved." His voice was flat, empty. "I also know what I couldn't save. The records don't talk about that part much." Veyara noticed his hands had stopped moving. He was gripping the rifle too tightly, his knuckles white. She recognized trauma when she saw it. She'd been trained to identify psychological warfare effects, even if she'd never experienced them personally. "I'm sorry," she said again, meaning it differently this time. "Not just for my words, but for what you had to endure." Kael finally looked at her directly, and she saw something in his eyes that made her scales shiver. Exhaustion. Not physical tiredness, but the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been carrying an unbearable weight for far too long. "Why are you really here, Princess?" he asked. "You apologized. You could have left it at that. So why are you still here?" Veyara surprised herself with her honesty. "Because I realized something today. I've trained my entire life to be a warrior, but I've never actually fought for anything. Everything I've done has been safe, controlled, and I thought that made me strong, made me superior. But you fought when nothing was safe, when everything was on the line, and you're still here despite how much it cost you, and I don't know how to reconcile that." For the first time since they'd met, Kael's expression shifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but maybe the memory of what a smile used to feel like. "You want to know the secret? There is no secret. You just keep going because stopping means everything you've already lost gets wasted. It's not noble. It's not heroic. It's just what you do." They sat in silence for a while, alien princess and human soldier, two beings from different worlds finding unexpected common ground in honesty. "The tournament continues tomorrow," Veyara said, eventually. "You'll face tougher opponents, I know. Will you be all right?" Kael resumed cleaning his rifle. "I'm always all right, Princess. That's the problem. I'm too good at surviving." Veyara stood to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I learned more from 4 minutes fighting you than from years of training with masters who let me win. Thank you for that." "I didn't do it to teach you," Kael said. "I did it to win. I know. That's why it mattered. The tournament continued, as tournaments do. Kael advanced through the brackets with the same efficient brutality he'd shown against Veyara. Other species started pulling his records, started understanding what humanity had survived. The mocking stopped. Respect, grudging but real, took its place. Veyara didn't advance as far. She lost in the semifinals to a Vorgathi commander, who'd apparently learned from the humans' example. But she fought better than she ever had before, because she wasn't fighting to prove her superiority anymore. She was fighting to test herself, to learn, to grow. On the final day, Kael stood in the championship match, and lost. Actually, to a Keltharian strategist, who managed to do what Veyara couldn't predict Kael's predictions. The human took second place, accepted his medal with the same emotionless expression he wore for everything, and prepared to return to Earth. Veyara found him at the departure docks, his small bag of belongings slung over one shoulder. "Safe travels," she said. "You too, princess. I learned something from you," Veyara continued. "About humility, about what real strength looks like. I wanted to thank you for that lesson, even if you didn't intend to give it." Kael looked at her for a long moment. "Then learn this too. Strength isn't about never breaking. It's about what you do after you've been broken. You've got potential, princess. Don't waste it on being what everyone expects you to be." He boarded his transport without another word, leaving Veyara standing on the dock with a revelation burning in her mind. She'd spent her entire life trying to live up to her empire's expectations, her family's legacy, her own inflated sense of superiority. Maybe it was time to figure out who she actually wanted to be. Me? I filed the whole incident away in my archive under moments of unexpected growth. A surprisingly small category, given how vast the galaxy is. Sometimes the best lessons come from the most unlikely teachers. Sometimes a 4-minute match teaches more than a lifetime of victories. And sometimes, just sometimes, getting absolutely demolished by someone you underestimated is exactly what you need. The galaxy kept spinning. Veyara returned to her empire and started actually listening to her veterans instead of just parading them around. Kael went back to Earth, to whatever quiet life he'd built away from the wars. They never met again. Didn't need to. Some lessons only require one teaching. But I'll tell you this. The next time the Krythonian Empire sent representatives to the Celestial Tournament, they fought differently. More adaptively, more humbly, more aware that strength comes in forms you don't always expect. And when other species asked what changed, Veyara, now leading her empire's military reform efforts, would smile and say, "We learned from someone who knew more about war than we ever wanted to know." That's the thing about the galaxy. It's full of teachers, if you're willing to be a student. Even if your teacher is a broken human who just wants to be left alone, who carries scars you can't see, who fights like every battle might be his last because once upon a time, every battle almost was. Respect what you don't understand. Listen more than you speak. And never ever underestimate someone just because they don't look like your idea of a warrior. Trust me on this. I've been watching civilizations make this mistake for centuries, and it never gets old seeing someone finally learn better, even if it takes getting beaten in 4 minutes, 17 seconds to figure it out.